working?
Yeah, you're live.
We're live?
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. Everyone, if you're out there, welcome to the first live talk for Tripwires and Triggers on the TikTok. Now, I got to tell you, we have really enjoyed this platform. So if there's anyone out there from TikTok who is on, I want to tell you that there's a great setup. So please don't shadow ban us. We're just trying to put out what's really happening to the folks. The other thing I want to say is this is our first time live. So we're going to test the waters here and see how this thing goes. Please ask questions. What we're going to do today is run you through the evolution of the Mexican cartels as to where they are today. Then we'll give you solutions to the problem, not just talking about a problem. We're going to actually show you solutions to it that the U.S. government needs to enact in order to change U.S. policy. And then finally at the end, we'll take some questions and answers, and we want to get some feedback from you if you don't mind, because we want to learn what we can do to make this better. And another thing, we'd like to do this weekly and really be able to show what is happening, and most importantly, how what is happening directly affects you and your families, whether you're in Mexico or on the U.S. side, because we're all tied in this together. So it's time to get solutions here to this problem. Now, I want to tell you from Tripwires and Triggers, everything we do here is funded from you. If you'll please go to our website, purchase some items, or provide a donation, that's greatly appreciated because that helps us. Right now we're trying to do another border operation where we can do some of these things to show you what's really happening. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started, and I hope you enjoy it. But please give us feedback, because the more feedback we get, the more we can do these if you want to do them. This is our first time trying it out. So with that, I'd like to start off with a quick story to kind of set the mood and the platform for what we're going to be talking about today. In 2004, I was an undercover narcotics agent in Brownsville, Texas, and we get called to the Border Patrol checkpoint where a couple of crooks had been arrested with 250 pounds of marijuana, and because of the small amount, none of the federal agencies wanted it because it didn't meet what we call threshold. Anything above 500 pounds of weed at that time is what the threshold was. So the state said, sure, we'd be happy to take those charges and the possession of the drugs and the criminals. So we traveled down to the border, get to the station, we start booking in these two crooks, when all of a sudden this young Border Patrol agent comes bursting into the station, and he is holding this precious little girl. She's between the age of about 3 to 4 years old, and she's absolutely screaming. Now at the time, here I am, this narcotics agent. I walk over to him and I'm trying to figure out what's going on, and he is absolutely just bouncing this precious little girl, because it's very clear he's young, he has no children. So I walk over and I'm like, hey man, can I help you? And as soon as I reach out to grab the little girl, I'll never forget the look on her face. She just went crazy. I mean, imagine now, I'm rocking at that time this 1980s mullet. And if you didn't grow up in the 80s, I'm sorry, you missed it. It was the best generation of all. But because, I'm in narcotics and that's what we do. I'm rocking this great 1980s earring and this fantastic goatee that's, about down to here. I mean, I look pretty roguish, if you will. And I grab this little girl, I get her close to me, and she is absolutely covered in mud. She's got mud from one side of her head down, all the way down one side of her. And so I grab her, I get her calmed down, get her close, and I said, hey, what's going on, to the agent? And he says, man, I was down on the water, and he said, I see something crossing, and I don't know what it is. Now, to put that in perspective, when you're near the Gulf of Mexico, the Rio Grande River is very wide. The water flows very quickly as it gets closer to the Gulf, as it impacts the ocean. And then we were very close to that. And he said, I see something crossing, and it's moving, I can't tell what it is. So as he goes to try to parallel it, as it's coming from the Mexico side to the US side, he sees something in the water splashing, and as he gets closer, he realizes what he's seeing. He's seeing this little girl on the back of a coyote. A smuggler is what they're known as, coyotes. And she's got her arms around his neck. And it's her legs that are flapping back and forth in the rushing water. That is why he couldn't tell what it was. And as he gets close and he parallels him, the smuggler looks over, sees the agent, reaches around his back, grabs the little girl, and he chunks her up onto the bank. And that's why she had the mud the way she did. She was lodged in the mud, half in the water, half out. And at that point, the smuggler jumps back into the water and he swims back for Mexico. As the agent runs over and he grabs the little girl out of the water, he picks her up, and as he looks into Mexico, what he realizes is that there's another little boy on the Mexico side. And he estimated it to me that he was about 10 to 11 years in age, wearing a backpack. And as the smuggler's swimming back to Mexico, this agent yells at him in Spanish, "Hey, what's going on here?" And the smuggler comes up on the Mexico side, and he's standing now somewhat near the little boy. And in Spanish, he yells back to the Border Patrol agent. He said, "I was hired by their family to bring them into the United States, but you've screwed this up now." So the agent, thinking pretty quickly on his feet, says, "I tell you what," he says, "grab the little boy, bring him across, I'll step to the side, and that way I can get them back together, and then I'll introduce, we'll get a hold of their family and get them introduced back with their family." And he said the smuggler looks down at the little boy, looks back up at him, looks back down, looks back at the agent, reaches over, grabs him by the hair, grabs the backpack, throws the kid to the ground, puts the backpack over his shoulder, and he walks off. At the same moment, the little boy jumps up and he runs off in the other direction. So we went down to the border and we staged for about an hour trying to locate the little boy. We were worried that he may try to cross looking for his sister and make sure he didn't drown. Unfortunately, we never saw him. I think about that quite often. And I tell you that story, ladies and gentlemen, before we go into the cartels, because there is another layer that you are not told about. And those are the layers we're going to talk about today. And that is what the smugglers are doing to people. That is what the cartels are doing to people, how they operate, and expose that to the American public, because no one is telling you these stories. No one's telling you what agents are going through every single day. And just to give you an example of these issues, in the last 4 months at the southwest border, now for fiscal year is how the federal government determines their years, okay? So for October, November, December, and January, for statistics that have come in so far, as you know, I'm big on data here, 20,278 of those events have occurred at your southwest border. And those are what your agents are dealing with every single day, including local, state law enforcement, trying to protect and hold that border. So today what we're going to be discussing are those other layers, not immigration here. That's not what we're about. We're about showing you what's not being told to you. Now, a little bit about me. And these little 1-minute TikToks, I got to tell you, we love TikTok, but it doesn't allow us to really be able to tell you a lot of our background, why we're doing what we're doing, and where we're going. And this is the platform here with these live events we're going to try to do to explain that. I worked 24 years in Texas law enforcement. I'm a retired captain from the Texas Department of Public Safety. I was in the Intel and Counterterrorism Division when I retired. And I led cross-border operations and built programs to go after the Mexican cartels, especially as the Zetas had become extremely hyper-violent. I moved 9 times during my career for the state of Texas. I was a trooper in El Paso, Texas. I was an undercover narcotics agent in Brownsville, and I was a lieutenant in Laredo, Texas, over 2 major drug squads in 2009, as the Zetas began to split from the Gulf Cartel and that war began to affect us. Then from 2010 until I retired in 2016, I was a captain in Austin, Texas in Intel and Counterterrorism Division, which was a new division for the agency. So I have a lot of experience in this, especially as the cartels began to become hyper-violent. But again, I want to explain everything that happens at that border directly affects you and your families. And I want to show you an example of that here. The CDC, if you get a chance, break out a piece of paper and a pen, because I'll be giving you areas that you can go to and Google yourself to validate what we're saying. You know, it's one thing for us to say it, but we need source information and validation. And we'll get better at this TikTok thing to be able to try to put it up on the big screen behind us or be able to show it to you real time as we're talking about things moving forward. But go to the CDC website. It's really stunning what's happening. From May of 2020 to May of 2019, 81,230 of our citizens overdosed and died as a result of the new drug fentanyl that's just swept our country, and methamphetamine. Now, to put that in perspective, those of you that remember in the 1980s when the crack epidemic was just absolutely impacting our country, we were only at about 10 to 12,000 overdose deaths, and I'm looking at the data here. So it gives you an understanding of, in the last few decades, how voluminous and how much death has been put upon the American people. So when we talk about fentanyl, we talk about that as true poison upon the American people and everyone else around the world where the cartels operate. Drug-related statistics in Mexico, drug killings in Mexico, killings by the cartels in Mexico are another thing that are not really talked about. Ladies and gentlemen, from 2007 until 2020, the Mexican citizens have lost 264,000 of their citizens to violence in Mexico. Violence has really taken over in that country. In what used to be very compartmentalized states, now it is just spreading across the country, and that's a fantastic nation, and it's horrible what's happening. But I want to be very clear. We are affected by the overdose deaths and cross-border crimes, which you're not being told about because of the reporting system, and we're going to talk about that. But the Mexican citizens are also being extremely impacted by the violence that has overtaken that. And you can look up CGOB's data to validate what we just showed you about the number of deaths occurring from violence in Mexico. Now, when you think of the Mexican cartels, I need you to think much bigger than what you're usually told about. When you think of Sinaloa Cartel, which is one of the oldest and largest cartels in Mexico, they are now in over 54 countries around the world. Cartel Jalisco New Generation, which is really the new kids on the block, if you will. They've only been around about 7 or 8 years. They're now in over 48 nations around the world. Just last week, they had an entire cell extradited from Romania here to the United States for moving in methamphetamine and cocaine into Europe. So I don't want you to think of this as a U.S.-Mexico problem anymore, which is what most of the media really focuses on. It is a much bigger, more complex issue. And when you talk about the cartel specifically, there are major segments internally within them, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So when you think of the capos or the bosses, such as the Chapo Guzmans, they are the leaders of these organizations. They make a lot of money, but for the most part, they are out of the day-in, day-out operations. They have operational cells. These cartels operate on a much bigger scale than just some criminal organizations. They're really run more like a Fortune 500 company, and I'm going to go into a lot of that for you. You have regional heads, you have divisional heads. They lead multiple countries and multiple states. But you also have another group known as the gatekeepers. Now, gatekeepers are a very, very important point, and one that you really want to talk about, or we want to talk about here today, and you would need to know about. Gatekeepers are the people who run the plazas, especially along our border or the northern border with Mexico and the U.S. These plaza bosses operate and control everything in their scope. And this is really the difference between a gang and a cartel. A cartel is not a gang, which you're told about all the time from these so-called experts that have never even been on the border. A cartel, and the reason they're different is because a gang may say in the United States, yeah, we control that block, or yeah, we control this area, but they don't really control it. That's your block, that's your area in America. You have a mayor, you have a police chief, and you have law enforcement that are in a government body that are elected that control that. In Mexico, it's different. The cartels control it because the mayor, the police chief, law enforcement, along with the military are usually paid off depending upon what plazas and to what degree. And I can tell you from personal experience, I've been on Title III investigations where you're listening to these plaza bosses and you hear a general call in and say, hey, I'm going to be assigned to your plaza. I want to come in and discuss payment. That's how it really works. So when you talk about level of control, it's completely different. Now, when you talk about lower ranking officials, so from the gatekeepers to division heads to regional bosses and godfathers, that's the big money. That's what most of these young sicarios and these people try to reach that level, but they usually never do. The lifespan of a young cartel sicario these days is 3 to 5 years. Many of them are very young. You also have panteras or medusas. Those are female sicarios, highly trained. Now, many of them today go through basic, intermediate, and advanced training. The people that provide that training are either former special forces in Mexico. They're the FARC. The FARC is a Colombian organization down in Colombia that, by the way, is designated as a foreign terrorist organization by the United States government. They're providing training and have been for well over a decade in Mexico. Then you have halcons. Now, halcons are what we call falcons or lookouts. They operate on both sides of our border. I've seen hawks as far as 30 miles into the U.S. personally. And what they do at the border This is how operational control is under the control of the cartels at your southwest border. Every bend, every turn in the river, on both sides, has halcons and lookouts. They operate and they check on just like law enforcement and EMS. Every time they're on the border, they come in on the radio and they check on what's known as central. They work their shift. They monitor every movement between within the river, within certain bends where they have area of responsibility, and everywhere they are always available. Now, we've done a lot of analysis, try to figure out, which is the best day, the best time for them to move drugs. That's not how it works at all. You have to understand, they control and have operational control of your border. So they know when there's no law enforcement, now's the time to shoot that gate and to move drugs through. And whoever's drugs the cartel is moving determines how wide of a gap they control and protect, because if it's a boss's drug load, then you want to make sure not to lose that load. So it's a very dynamic situation. Now, when you talk about how they operate, they use encrypted handheld radios, apps, all kinds of things, depending upon which cartel, what part of the southwest border is operating. And it is the lifeblood of how they operate. If you take away their communications, that's how you win in the law enforcement side. And I won't go into that much here because of the national security implications there, but it is the lifeblood of these cartels. And I can tell you that they are operating on two-way handheld encrypted radios far in our country. Now, a lot of people are out there saying, yeah, I'm hearing you, Jason, but why do we keep going after them the same way? Stop going after the capos. That's an old, outdated model that the Mexican government went into. We need to follow the money investigations. Just so you know, follow the money investigations are still an investigation. And without the tools of national power and the authorities we need to be able to go after their money very rapidly and quickly, we're still conducting outdated models of investigations, and it's why they continue to win. Now, when you target these cartels today, you don't look at them as a normal historic organization. You look at them as a network. And how you target a network is differently based on its structure. Every cartel is different. The Z's, for example, the old Zetas, they were very hierarchical because why? They came from the military. So when they broke away from the Gulf cartel, it was very easy. You go after the certain capos and you can degrade them very rapidly. So are they a hub, a spoke, a wheel, or a mesh network determines how we win going against them in the 21st century. Now, when you think internally of them, and I mentioned a little bit earlier about they operate as a Fortune 500 company today, I want to give you some examples of what I'm talking about with them. The cartels have operational cells. This is command and control, this is coordination, the purchasing of plazas, and the acquiring or the acquisition of drugs. That's more or less the leadership side. But you also have another side, the enforcement side. Those are your sicarios and your enforcement action wing that protect the plazas. Those groups handle collections, adjustments, kidnapping, security, murders, threats, etc. Then you have one of what I consider the most important cells of them all. Those are logistics. Those are your attorneys, your technicians, your transportation, and your distribution networks. Specifically accountants and lawyers. Now, lawyers within the cartels are a big deal. They are a big deal. And for those of you that are watching, those are the ones that really need to be held accountable, because what they're helping provide is the legal means through Mexico's legal processes to protect and insulate these organizations as they commit horrible crimes upon the Mexican citizens and immigrants coming through Mexico. And then what they do is through their propaganda cells, which is in another wing, they then coordinate, recruit. They handle all media, including protests, disinformation campaigns, which, by the way, are absolutely massive. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars go to pay off journalists every year and different civil rights and civil liberties groups. Then you have banners, YouTube. So you have to be very careful when you're monitoring something you see on social media. It can very well be a propaganda campaign from one cartel against another one, and it has nothing to do with that other cartel. So in 2006 is really where the cartels transitioned from organized crime into an insurgency. In 2006, what happened is when you had President Calderon, who took power as the president of the country of Mexico. Everything he did was to go after the cartels, and he began using the military as far back as 2006 to do that. And immediately what was found, and I will tell you when that occurred, we here in Texas law enforcement, along with I guess most leaders around the world, around the country at that time, thought that that strategy was horrible. You don't use your military to go after something domestically. That's what law enforcement is for. But what we didn't really understand and really realize at the time is just how degraded law enforcement in Mexico was, and how corrupted they had become working with the cartels. I mean, I could tell you incredible stories about some of these local law enforcement agencies not even have bullets for their guns, yet they're going up against cartel members like the Zetas, who had light anti-tank weapons and hand grenades. So it was very clear, perhaps to the Mexican government, what needed to change, but in the United States, that tripwire was not well understood, and you were told for many, many years that was a wrong strategy. Now looking back, it was the right strategy. And what President Calderon did, in my opinion, and I'll just tell you straight out, was to do everything he could to insulate and protect his nation before it ended up where it is today. And you can look at that as well in the data of deaths occurring in Mexico, because since then it has just risen. And if you look at President AMLO, who is in charge right now, who is doing nothing to take on the cartels, nothing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I have still to this day very good insight as to what is happening behind the law enforcement curtain. And I can tell you that we are seeing no leadership taken down. You've had one capo within the cartels taken down under this administration. And it is also a real indicator and a tripwire that why more Mexican citizens are dying in Mexico today than when the Mexican government was going after the cartel leaders to hold them accountable. And I will tell you this, someone who has worked this for a very long time, that you cannot give them a break like we are right now, because right now they're building up so much infrastructure, so much money and capabilities as nothing is happening to them. So the insurgency really began in 2006, and that's when we began to see them fighting back against the Mexican government, and we were stunned. I mean, I can remember in 2008, there was a gun battle that occurred at the Texas-Mexico border where they were using light anti-tank weapons and RPGs and hand grenades. We had never seen that before, and yet this is happening literally right on our border. Now it's every day, so it's no big deal now, but that's the way it was back then. By 2009, a real evolution had occurred. I was stationed in Laredo, Texas as a lieutenant in DPS narcotics, and we were stunned at the violence that was beginning to happen. The separation between the Gulf Cartel, now remember, the Zetas at the time were trained GAFE members who had began to go and work for OCL Cardenas and the Gulf Cartel. As they became powerful enough and as the relationships began to be degraded under the failed leadership of what they considered Tony Tormenta, they began breaking away. Now you will hear from a lot of experts that they were not loyal and they got too big, and that's not true at all. Not at all. Lascano was very, very dedicated to OCL Cardenas, and it took them a long time before they broke away from the Gulf Cartel. But the Zetas were a major tripwire that the U.S. government missed, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. They flat out missed it. The hyper-violence of the Zetas was unbelievable. And what it forced were all the other cartels to raise their capabilities, which is what we see now. Every cartel has to have that level of training and tradecraft that I'm going to be talking about today in order to take on a rival cartel. Because when you're sitting across from these young sicarios, and when you're sitting across from these cartel members and you're talking to them, it's really stunning. They talk about what is happening in Mexico as war. When they talk about another cartel, they're at war. I can tell you a great story. I was down in Roma, Texas with Lara Logan. It was one of the first times she and I had gone down to show what was really happening at the border. And these two young men showed up, and I knew exactly what they were. They were Halcons, and they were sent over to figure out why there were so many video cameras, on the U.S. side. And they were nice guys, but she started talking to them, and they immediately just opened right up, and they admitted. And the very first thing this one guy said to her when she said, "How's things going over there?" He said, "We're at war." And I stopped her and I said, "Did you catch that?" And the reason I say that is it doesn't matter what my perception is or yours, quite frankly. It's what is theirs. And why are they so aggressive in combating and going at it the way they are? And the reason for that is because they are truly trying to take over territory from one another. Happens every single day. But the Zetas were a major tripwire of what was to come. And this was their evolution into terrorism. If you get a chance, take a minute here, and I want you to Google the massacre at San Fernando, in which 72 migrants were executed. All that happened was caused by the Los Zetas going into Cartel de Golfo's territory as they battled. And as they killed these migrants, they knew that it was going to cause the Mexican government to come in and go after Cartel de Golfo, when really it was the Zetas who had committed it. That is a prime common tactic. So you may see something that happens in a certain region in the country, but don't think that just because of where it happened, it was that cartel, because very often they're trying to blame it on a rival cartel. In addition, we had the Allende massacre, Allende massacre, where over 300 citizens in Mexico, right along our Texas-Mexico border, were executed, killed, and then guisoed. If you're not familiar with the term guiso is a process by which the cartels use to make people disappear. When you sit down and you talk to them, they will tell you that you can't count a body that doesn't exist. And this was really their transition into terrorism. You can also look up, if you would, August 25th, 2011, the Monterrey, Mexico casino fire, which killed 53 people. That was where Miguel Trevino, the leader at the time of the Zetas, well, actually, I think he was second in charge at that time, sent gunmen in to firebomb the casino because they had not paid the tax. And while in committing that crime, many people ran to the back, and 53, unfortunately, were killed from smoke inhalation and other things. Horrible, horrible crimes. Then we had another layer as well beginning to happen that we were really stunned by, and that was that tradecraft began to be implemented into the tactics that were being seen. We saw the first car bomb in July 15th of 2010 in Juarez. Some of you may have seen it. If you get a chance, Google that, watch that live. It's where they killed a citizen in Juarez. They then dressed him in a police officer's uniform. They placed his body on the side of the road, notified their version of 911, and as law enforcement responded in EMS, they set off a car bomb. Now, that was the first car bomb to be set off in Mexico that went public the way it did. And what was really interesting was the mechanisms that were used and where the cartels developed that tradecraft. And one thing you want to definitely know is that when you see one new tripwire, one new capability, if you will, by a cartel, very rapidly and very quickly other cartels themselves will also begin to develop that capability. By the end of the year, there were 4 more of those events. By June 29th of 2012, a car bomb was set off in Laredo, Texas that was really something. It happened right across our border. They were going after the mayor. Now, he survived the attack, but a few years later he was found deceased in the trunk of his vehicle. So they ultimately got him, but they missed him then. But you could track the tradecraft getting better and better over time. I want to talk about armored vehicles for a second. You've got several stages and generations of armored vehicles of the cartels. The first generation, we used to call them monsters. They were these huge, massive armored vehicles that, I used to wonder, how in the world do you stop these things? I mean, they were just heavy. Most of them were either dualies, truck tractors, or something like that. And what the cartels told us was that, no, it's no problem. You just run right up to them and open up right in the door seam, and eventually those rounds will shoot right between the door seam and hit the driver, and it'll stop them. But what has happened over time, and you have to remember, they're at war every day. So as they're at war, they're learning how to get better and better. And what we began to see is that they will tell you is that mobility is life. And so now what you see in their gun battles is they are always moving. Their vehicles are much lighter. Second generation were more just smaller pickup trucks in the F-250, F-350 category. These vehicles were just half armored compared to, but they were more mobile and very effective. Now, Generation 3, very hard to tell the difference until you were very close. These look like regular pickup trucks. Diesel pickups is what they usually like the most. And then layers of metal on the inside versus the outside, but allowing them to be mobile. Now today we see a mixture of everything, from the old large heavy monsters to much smaller, more mobile platforms. Now the reason for that is because the way they battle now, they battle much differently. They use these armored vehicles, heavy and light armor, in tactics when they go after a rival's area. A lot of people will tell you that there is no reason to designate the Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations because they have no ideology. I want you to know that is absolutely false. Cartels are brilliant on this model. I mean, think about it. They can kill over 264,000 people in their country, yet we in the United States won't designate them as foreign terrorist organizations because they have no ideology to control. It's just for drug trafficking routes. Now, you're still told that. Yeah, that was probably true in the early 90s. That is not where they are today. CNN did a great report, and if you get a chance, look it up. Type in 132 politicians, candidates, and staffers murdered in Mexico. And what you'll see is that just in the last election, national election that occurred in Mexico from September of 2017 to July 1st of 2018, 132 politicians were killed. That's a lot of people, and it really goes to show that the cartels are just smarter. Remember, they use lawyers and accountants, and they operate much differently than people everywhere, than regular terrorist organizations. The final transition into where we are today, into what we call a parallel government. You may have heard that new term coming out in the last year of the Trump administration. That term is correct. And what happened was in 2015, Operation Jalisco commenced. This is where the Mexican government went after the cartels in Jalisco, specifically CJ&G, to go after El Mencho. And they shot down a helicopter, killing several. It was a failed operation. And then from there, they went in and they began stopping most of the state of Jalisco. I mean, I'm looking at it right here. If you get a chance, Google that, Operation Jalisco. What you'll find is that they conducted 39 roadblocks. This was May 1st of 2015. 39 roadblocks, 25 municipalities throughout the state were involved. 4 clashes, 19 arrested, 7 dead, 19 wounded, 26 public transportation routes affected, 12 highways affected and shut down, 10 banks and 12 gas stations completely shut down. What you find is that when the cartels battle for space, or when the government of Mexico and them battle, they have truck tractors, 18-wheelers and everything on standby in which they set them on fire, block roadways, and hold everything down. And it's their way to allow their bosses to be able to leave the area and get out. But what happened, there was a flip side to that, and that is that El Mencho himself reached out to the president at the time, who was President Nieto, and said, if you try that again, we'll come for Mexico City. And this was truly the transition. Now, many analysts around the country decided that they were the most violent cartel in Mexico. No, that wasn't the case at all. All they were was showing a new capability as the government began to come after them. Now, last year we broke another story involving CJ&G. You may have seen it. It was where Cartel Jalisco New Generation had a whole new set of armored vehicles and armament and capabilities not seen before. And the reason that was a major tripwire and a major concern is because if you go over and you look at how the Mexican government operates day in, day out, you have most of Sedena, which is their big army, operating in just pickup trucks, driving around completely open, where now you have the cartel, the elite group, that had unprecedented capabilities with armored vehicles. And it just showed to where they had come. Now, in April 2016, and if you would Google this, the first surface-to-air missile was seized just south of Juarez. This missile really was a game changer in that it showed us that now they were getting ground-to-air capabilities. And I'm sure they had them for some time before, but the other reason it was of major interest is because this cartel was very degraded. This cartel at the time, you have to remember, the war between Sinaloa and the Juarez cartel had ended. So for them to possess this level of capability near our border was again another tripwire missed again by the federal government. You will also hear very often that there is no violence occurring in Mexico, and that as long as what's happening down there doesn't affect us here, that fine, let them do what they want to do. That is absolutely false. I can give you countless incidents that have been happening here in the States, and I'll give you one right now. I want you to Google May 23rd, 2013, South Lake, Texas. Again, May 23rd, 2013, South Lake, Texas. That's where a lawyer who had been working for the Gulf Cartel for a very long time, was hiding in the United States with his wife, living in a very upscale neighborhood in South Lake, Texas. As he went to a mall, a group of sicarios located him and executed him. Now that occurred just outside of Dallas, Texas. The organization spent almost $1 million just to locate him. Now that's about what I can say about the case publicly, but you can go in there. There's been some great reporting on that case, and you can look at it. Again, we also had another event March 16th, 2015 in South Padre Island, where a body was discovered with no head floating on the intercoastal. Individual arrested was a Border Patrol agent along with an entire cell who had been working with the Gulf Cartel, who was responsible for that. Another case involving spillover violence. And ladies and gentlemen, you can do this endlessly, and I'm going to go into great detail as to why these things are occurring and why it's not really being shown to you. It's not a conspiracy issue. I'll explain it here shortly. Another incident, horrible incident, June 7th, 2018. Sinaloa Cartel kills and beheads a 13-year-old autistic Alabama girl and her grandmother, who was believed to be involved in the smuggling. Again, that was June 17th, 2018. Sinaloa beheads an autistic girl in Alabama. Public corruption side is really something else. The level of corruption happening in Mexico, we're now seeing along our southern border, really affecting different levels of leadership and elected officials in the United States. The FBI needs to come out, especially for those of you agents that are out there watching right now. You really need to be honest with the American people about the level of corruption now hitting us on the southwest border. Everything all right? We good? June 9th, 2017, the U.S. Border Patrol agent was kidnapped and tortured. His fingers were cut off and he was dumped just outside of New Mexico. What that basically signifies is he was probably corrupt, but still. Another incident in the United States. And look, I could do this all day long. I mean, we could just keep going. But what I'm going to close with here today is solutions to the problem. Now, over the last, what are we at now? 30, 40 minutes, I've talked to you about crimes occurring that affect you and your families. But I want to show you why the discussion is not where it needs to be. And it's not a conspiracy issue, it's a failed policy issue. Everything we have talked about today is not captured unless you have a good reporter that is going out there doing the hard work to understand it and uncover it to show it to you. So when we talk about the Uniform Crime Report, UCR in the United States is the reporting mechanism that the Department of Justice and the FBI use to tell you, the American people, how crime is fluctuating. That system was created in 1929, implemented in 1934, and has been very updated very little since then. And I want to give you an example. So murder, manslaughter, forcible rape, robbery, aggravated robbery, burglary, theft, larceny, and motor vehicle theft are what is captured under the Uniform Crime Report. But everything you and I have discussed today is not captured. You may have heard of some of these things. Public corruption, kidnappings, extortions, drug trafficking, mother of God. This country has been at how long in a supposed war on drugs, and amongst 18,000 law enforcement agencies in 2021, we can't tell you how much dope is seized in this country, yet you and I can Google on Google Trends and we can see what's being discussed all over the world real time. Human trafficking. Ladies and gentlemen, that crime did not exist in this country before the early 2000s. And what I mean by that is you can go and look at the law books. Now, there are many people that disagree with me on that, but look at the law books. In Texas alone, we didn't even have a law on the books for human trafficking until 2001. So the borders have shrunk and our oceans don't protect us anymore. Human smuggling, money laundering, weapons trafficking, money laundering, cyber crimes, and the list goes on, all of which we've talked about today. None of that is captured. Now, what is causing that? A broken, outdated system that the Department of Justice and FBI still uses. Now, this year, the good news is this year, they're supposed to go to NIBRS. That's known as the National Incident-Based Reporting System. You can Google it. I think it's fantastic. It'll capture 52 new index crimes. It's much better. But did I mention it was created in 1984, implemented in 1988, and so far to this day, is still not implemented 50 states across this country. And if we as a nation can't get the little things right, we're never going to get the big things right. And if we can't show you how trends are changing real time, so give you a great example, the crimes I talked about, murders in the United States, directly linked to the cartels or other organizations outside our borders, this system doesn't capture it, nor does NIBRS, frankly. So we have a lot of things that are simple to fix, but what do we keep doing? We keep putting lawyers who've never run government agencies at the federal government at the top of these agencies. And what do? They fail at a miraculous level, continually doing the same thing, not knowing what needs to be done. But because they're politically connected, they're able to get these jobs. So that's part of the issue. The other thing in which those of you who have been following us for a very long time know is that we've been saying we must designate the Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. We've been at this for 4 years. And the reason for that is not to go to war with the cartels. It is to look at them for what they really are. Our investigative model, the model that was implemented under our Constitution and our processes in this country, are set to ensure that the way we conduct investigations make sure that when the government comes after one of us as citizens, that they are doing it in the process that is very slow and meticulous by design. We want it that way to ensure that we are not wrongly convicted of a crime we didn't commit. Now, when you start taking that beyond borders, which DOJ loves to try to do, when will the lesson be learned? They fail at a miraculous level. Our system was never designed for the world. So when we talk about the cartels, we must implement a strategy that works. By designating them as foreign terrorist organizations, here's what happens. You have the tools of national power are implemented. And what that allows for is that if you're a cartel member in the United States, you can be immediately removed from the country because you're a terrorist. We don't have to conduct a 2-year investigation on you. But you have to remember too, cartel members have a lot of money. They're able to get visas and be here legally in the United States. They're in every state all over this country. We're full of them. During Operation Python by DEA last year in 2020, Udom Dillon, the the administrator of DEA, said that just CJ&G had over 100 operatives in this country. Just CJ&G, that one, at high levels. So the game has really changed. Now, the other thing that the terrorism designation will allow us to do is go after their money. Now, you hear that all the time, and it sounds really good. I mean, say it slow and like you mean it, right? Follow the money investigation. It just sounds sexy. Here's the real truth of it. It's just another investigation. We've been doing it for over 10 years. It's nothing new, but it's a slow process, but you're not told that. It's just like this thing where these so-called guys go on national TV and they just keep telling you, it's like a talking point. But if we have the designation, now we go anywhere in the world and we take their money and we use it against them. The third thing we do is we put them in a box. Now we limit their mobility. Remember, I was telling you earlier about how the cartels are global. If you limit their mobility, now they can't go throughout the world. We put them in a box so that they can't so they're on watch lists. They can't go around the world. They can't be in the United States, and we take their money from them. Now the Mexican government can go after them, or if we have to, worst case scenario, now we do have the tools of national power, and shame on them. Why is this so hard? I'll tell you why. Because the U.S. State Department's Western Hemisphere Division have failed you. They have failed you and they have failed the people of Mexico. And they have failed you miserably. So with that, I want to thank you for coming on today. I hope this went well. We'll see. If you liked it, let us know. If not, we'll come back next week. If it does go over well, again, I want to ask you to thank you, first off, for following us. We love this TikTok platform. If TikTok you're watching right now, man, don't shadow ban us. We're trying to stay with this program. We love this platform. Let us keep getting the information out to the folks about what's really happening. There's a whole lot more going on than just immigration that affects the American people and people all over the world. And we're trying to share that information. The other thing to it, please go to tripwiresandtriggers.com. If you like what we're putting out, then please donate or buy something. All of that helps us for operations to show you what's happening and so that we can go back to the border and into other countries to show you real time. Please go and help us there and donate. And with that, thank you very much from Tripwires and Triggers. And as always, be safe.